Welcome to the Hey Chaplain podcast. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. This podcast is for cops and for everyone interested in law enforcement culture, careers, and wellness. On Hey Chaplain, you'll hear from dispatchers and federal agents, sheriffs and U.S. Marshals, as well as the occasional mafia history expert. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain share their own experiences so that police officers everywhere can survive and thrive. Today I'm talking to Michael Sugrue. Michael wrote a book called Relentless Courage to address the constant barrage of traumatic events experienced by first responders. He's an advocate for more transparency in police culture, and he speaks with experience as a California officer who was involved in a fatal shooting, years of investigations, depositions, and even being sued, and then experiencing difficult retirement, leaving on bad terms with some of the department leadership. All of these issues and more contribute to the difficulties that first responders have, but talking about them and how to overcome them can make a meaningful impact on how you deal with the hand that you were dealt. Here's Michael Sugrue. Hello, Michael. How are you today?
Doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm glad we have you on the show. I'm glad to talk about your story and about your book. Can you talk to me about the officer-involved shooting that you were involved in and that you relayed in your book?
Sure. I'm going to take you back to 2012. And at that point, my life was going perfect. Literally, I was happily married. I had a young daughter. I had just bought my dream house. And I was just promoted to the rank of patrol sergeant. And literally, I was on my second solo shift. We were working the graveyard shift. Mm-hmm. So we started at 9:30 at night, ended at 7:30 in the morning.
This is in Walnut Creek, California?
It is, which is located in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay.
And so the shift started out well, nothing uneventful. It was quiet. And it was our Friday, so we're going to be off for several days. And about 4 hours from going off duty, a little bit after 3 a.m., a call comes out, a very frantic call, and the dispatcher gets on the radio. She sounds extremely panicked, like I've never heard her before. And she puts out that there is a woman inside an apartment or condominium, and there's a subject with a knife. And at that point, I had minimum staffing. It's myself and literally 4 officers on the street. And so we're all immediately going to this call. And we know the general area. It's in a high, dense residential area, so a lot of condos, a lot of apartments. It's very dark. It's kind of a poorly lit area. And as I'm about halfway there, and this seems like eternity, but literally we're talking seconds, the dispatcher again gets on the radio, very panicked, and she puts out an update and says that the boyfriend and girlfriend are now barricaded inside their bedroom. And I was confused, to be honest with you. I wasn't sure if the boyfriend was the one with a knife or if there was like an intruder or another subject inside this condominium with a knife. So I ask, she clarifies, and she says, no, there is a third subject with a knife. And at that point, I've just got all these crazy, thoughts racing through my head, envisioning what I'm going to see, imagining blood everywhere. And I get to the scene very quickly. As I pull up, I find the condominium complex, but I don't know where this particular unit is. It's a very big complex. It's attached 2-story condos on all sides. And as I'm pulling up, opening my car door, now the dispatcher starts screaming on the radio and puts out that there's a struggle. And she then loses all contact inside the condominium. The phone line goes dead.
Oh, my.
And at that point, thank God, one of my officers, female officer, pulls up right behind me. And we literally look at each other, and we start running towards the sounds of these screams. We can hear blood-curdling screams coming from a female from a distance. And we just start running towards that direction, not knowing where we're going.
Right.
And I remember we had to literally crawl underneath an outside stairwell. We get into this open courtyard. And so now there's condominiums on all sides of us. We locate the unit. And just before we get in front of the unit, it now goes dead silent. So literally from these blood curling screams to just eerie silence with nobody outside. I mean, no movement, no noises. And so we're announcing ourselves. And I know I've got more officers that are coming, but we got to get inside this condominium. And so we identify ourselves, put it out there. I try kicking open the door with no luck. My partner motions, and there's a huge window the size of a door. It was a louvered window, and it was shattered inside the condominium. And so at that point, she goes in. I go in right behind her. We clear the downstairs. Other than that kitchen area, there's no signs of a struggle or disturbance. We don't find anybody. And then we get to the bottom of this stairwell of this 2-story condominium. And we're literally shoulder to shoulder. She's to my right, and to her right is a solid wall. And at first, we don't see anybody, and we've got our guns out, again, announcing ourselves, come out, show us your hands. And again, it seems like eternity, but I'm literally talking a matter of seconds. Moments later, a male partially comes out. He's just profusely sweating. His eyes are wide open, literally staring straight through us. And we can't see the right side of his body, so I can't see his right arm or his hand, his leg. And we're giving commands, show us your hands, show us your hands. I mean, literally no reaction. There's no facial expressions. There's no body movement. I don't remember his eyes blinking. I mean, literally staring straight through us as if we're not there. Now, during this point, 2 more officers make it inside the condominium, a male officer, a female officer. And I immediately yell for one of them to get the taser. And so the male officer yells, "I've got the taser." He positions himself right behind us. And then the other officer goes perpendicular to the stairwell. Seconds later, my partner yells, "He's got a knife, he's got a knife." And at that point, in his right hand, we can now see the right side of his body. He's clenching a full-size butcher knife. And at this point now, of course, we're yelling, "Drop the knife, drop the knife." Guns out, flashlights on him. Again, no reaction whatsoever. Literally moments later, he takes the knife up over his head in a stabbing position and starts coming down the stairwell towards us. At that point, I fire my duty weapon. Later find out that the 2 female officers, they fire their weapons, and the male officer behind us tries to use his taser. Well, the taser, later we found out that one of the prongs went into the ceiling. There's kind of like a slight overhang over the stairwell. And we didn't know it at the time, but I had hit him twice, but he's now at the bottom of the stairs, and I don't see any blood. I don't see any injuries whatsoever. And the 2 female officers, they retreated to the family room, dining room area. And now the male officer who had the taser, he dropped that, pulled out his gun, and we're literally just a few feet from the subject at the bottom of the stairs. And he's still clenching this full-size butcher knife in his hand. And all we know is that he's between us and the couple upstairs. We don't know if they're dying, bleeding out, if they've already been killed. Right. But we've got to get to them. And so literally it's just my partner and I, guns out, feet away. We're yelling, "Drop the knife, drop the knife." And he starts coming back up with the butcher knife. And at that point, we both fire our weapons. And there's no nice way to say it, but he was killed instantly. Yeah. I mean, absolutely devastating wounds. Yeah. And we checked his vitals. We didn't have any. I ordered the 2 female officers to go upstairs to check on the couple. And it turns out they had been physically barricading themselves against their bedroom door. And this suspect was stabbing through the door with a butcher knife. And the door was literally coming off the hinges. Yeah. And I know for a fact, had we not gotten there when we did, they would have been killed. I mean, no doubt they would have been killed. And that incident right there, brand new student, there'd never been a police shooting that entire time I was at my agency. The last one was several years before. And it literally changed everything. It changed my entire life. It set off a chain of events.
Let's talk about how it changed things, because on the surface of it, it sounds like what we would often call a good shoot. Nevertheless, that even a good shoot still affects a person. And so before we get into the investigation and everything else, can you just tell me about your reaction to that night and the hours afterward? I mean, how did you physiologically react to having to take this subject's life?
Well, one key thing happened right after we got the couple outside, and the boyfriend was very stoic. The female girlfriend was bawling when she was crying. And I remember she gave me a hug, and she made a statement at that time that this wasn't like him. I don't know what happened. And I was confused because I thought this was some intruder, that stranger that had broken inside this condominium. And it turned out it was actually one of the roommates that lived there. And to this day, we don't know why he did what he did. I mean, this suspect had no criminal history.
Yeah, it wasn't in
He had
character
no police
for him.
contacts.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. He had no history of mental issues, and he literally was, for all intents and purposes, a good young man who was productive. He had a job, he had friends, he had family, very well liked. And part of that is what made this shooting so difficult, is that we couldn't understand why this person did what he did. Why did he try to kill his roommates? And why did he try to kill my officers and I? And so, eventually we were sued immediately, and a lawsuit that drug on for years. And to this day, in 2022, we still don't know why that young man did what he did.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what makes this so difficult for me, is because I think, and I don't know for sure, I'm only making a guess here, but in my heart, I believe that, if this had been some hardened criminal, some serial rapist, some, mass murderer, some gangbanger, whatever, I don't think it would have affected me the way it did. Mm-hmm. I think because we don't have the answers and we don't know why this happened, the facts are that I have to live with the fact that I took a human life. Yeah. It doesn't matter that it was a, quote, justified shooting, because it was. We were cleared by internal investigation. We were cleared quickly by the district attorney's office. I mean, even years later, we were cleared in a federal lawsuit. But the fact is that I, as a person, as a Christian, I have to live with the fact that I took this young man's life.
Yeah.
And it affected me then, and it still affects me to this day.
What are some of the effects that you recognize, both short term, like right after it happened, and now longer term?
I remember I had been up for several hours. We got moved from the scene. Eventually I was sequestered, and then I got interrogated or questioned by the DAs and the IA investigators. And I remember being driven home by an officer from my agency, and they followed in my personal car. And I got to the front door of my house. I was happily married at the time. Like I said, I had a very young daughter. And I remember just seeing them at the door, and I immediately felt numb. I felt detached. And I felt like something was off. And I remember just wanting to push past them and go up to my room. I had blackout shades because I worked the night shift, and just sleep this away and hope that it was some bad nightmare, something that really didn't happen. And of course, that's not the case, but that started off the isolation. That started off constant nightmares. I literally felt like there wasn't anybody I could talk to. And for some intents, I was ordered not to talk about this with anybody because we were under investigation, but I could have talked to a therapist or a chaplain or, a minister, something like that, where there's those protective relationships. But I didn't have those established relationships at that point in my life. And there wasn't anybody I could go talk to. And so, here I am now with these nightmares where I can't get this image out of this my mind, this face of this person that tried to kill me and my officers. And literally, I just started distancing myself from my own family. And then now you're talking about anxiety, you're talking about depression, drinking way too much, trying to drink myself to sleep.
Yeah. And
then when I do finally go to sleep, having these night terrors that just wake me up covered in sweat. And that's really, I noticed the difference almost immediately, but it was a gradual thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I was in the shooting, I went home, and now I'm a disaster. It wasn't like that. I would say there were some immediate things, but I would say overall it was a very gradual thing where things slowly got worse and worse.
Now, during this time, you had several other things start to unravel over the next several months even. Things kept compounding. You mentioned being sued. That was a big one. Can you talk to me about that a little bit?
It was. We were sued almost immediately. And, I remember at that time, it wasn't like now. So our agency, we didn't have body cameras. Back then in 2012, 2013, they didn't do these big media press releases where they had shootings and they would play the dispatch tapes and then play the body footage and all this kind of stuff. And I remember when they were interviewing some of my administration on the news, they didn't even say the guy was armed with a knife for like weeks. And so they basically, when they were putting information out there to the public, it left a lot of people asking questions. And that I felt like here I am trying to defend myself. And it's like, why aren't we just putting the facts out there?
Right. Without the facts, it sounds like 4 cops went in and killed a guy in his own house.
Well, exactly.
Right.
And
Yeah.
people are going to start filling in the blanks and making comments and insinuations. And so there is that part of it. But, this pressure of this lawsuit. And then, of course, the I investigation drug on for months and months and months, along with the DA's investigation. About 5-6 months after the shooting, we had our first kind of civil legal process. It was called a coroner's inquest. And that's where, at this point now, my marriage is starting to fall apart. I mean, I'm having major, major marital problems. I invited my wife to this coroner's inquest. There was a lot of people from my agency. It was open to the public. The press was there. The family members of the man who tried to kill me were there. And that was where I heard the dispatch tapes again for the first time. And it literally put me right back to that night. And I remember I was on the stand in front of this jury in this courtroom full of people. And I broke down on the stand when I got to the part where he comes down the stairs. I can talk about it now, but back then I couldn't. And I literally started bawling like a baby in this full courtroom. And I was embarrassed. I mean, I'm a former Air Force captain, security forces, undercover narcotics agent, police sergeant. I had never cried in front of anybody like that. Not in a courtroom, not in a public setting, not in front of other people. And here I am now, and I was literally ashamed and embarrassed. I felt weak. I felt like there was something wrong with me. And all I wanted to do was to run out of that courtroom and go hide. I mean, that's the reality of it. And that's where I knew, like, something is really not right here. Something is going on with me. And I look at it now, and it's, the shooting for me was the incident that pushed me over the edge. And we haven't gotten into this detail yet, but for most first responders, most law enforcement officers, we're exposed to hundreds and hundreds of traumatic incidents over our career. And I had been exposed to numerous traumatic incidents before the shooting. In fact, one where I was a millisecond from shooting somebody. And the thing is, I never talked about those things. I never addressed the humanity behind them. And so I kept all of that bottled inside until it just kept stacking up on top of each other until where it was just too late and it pushed me over.
Yeah. Now, at the same time, in the same time frame generally, I guess after your shooting, you were also having health problems. And then you had a loss in the family too, right?
I did. So, first off and foremost, my stepfather, he was my everything. He was my hero. He's the reason why I even got into law enforcement in the first place. My parents got divorced when I was about 8 years old, and my stepfather had known me my whole life. And I remember at 8 years old, I actually became a police volunteer. And so he got me started on this entire path of law enforcement. And during this whole process of after the shooting, the marital problems, the lawsuit, he actually gets diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And he ends up dying literally months after that. And he was my everything. He was the one that I would go to when I had, any questions about my career, or any questions about law enforcement, or any questions about being a good father or a good husband. I mean, literally, he was my rock. He was my hero. And after that, I started coming down with repeated skin cancer diagnoses on my face, on my neck, on my left arm. And I know today, I truly think that got brought on by stress. Stress has detrimental effects to our, not just our mental health, but our physical health.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the fact of skin cancer, but it was the idea that here, my stepfather, my hero, he just got diagnosed with cancer. He dies. And now I'm getting cancer. And all I could think about was dying. I had this constant fear of my daughter not knowing who I was or how much I loved her because she was so young. And I literally felt like I was doomed, like I was going to die at any time. And I never felt like that. That shooting where he came down and almost killed me with that butcher knife, I literally lost that feeling of invincibility. Up to that point, I felt like I was untouchable. I felt like I was a superhero, like nothing out there would ever harm me. And literally came so close to losing my life. And it's this paradox where part of me had this fear of dying, but then eventually I actually wanted to die.
Yeah. Well, you felt like that was what was going to happen. And I think that another aspect, not only was it the danger of that shooting, him coming down the stairs with a knife coming right at you, but also the loss of your stepdad. He was a cop and he was your superhero. And when he dies and you've faced mortality yourself, something combined with all the other factors, the health problems, the marriage, everything else, it sent you down a spiral that I think you talk about really well, and you really lay it out there very transparently in your book. But I wanted to note that with your daughter, you had a behavior that you kept doing every chance you got. You'd take selfies.
With these marital problems, it eventually led to a very contentious divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And where I was, fighting for custody, and all that mattered to me was my daughter. I mean, she is my everything. She is my world. And I literally, between the combination of the fear and thought that I was going to die on top of this contentious divorce, I literally thought that my ex-wife was going to erase all memory of me, that my daughter would never know who her dad was, would never know how much I truly loved her. And so I figured that if I took enough pictures, and I did this obsessively, like literally I would have her half the time. I had split custody, and every time I had her, I would just take a bunch of selfies. And I thought in my mind is that, she may not see these for years, but hopefully someday she finds them, or hopefully someday somebody shares them with her and she sees and knows how much I loved her and how much I cared for her.
Yeah. And it almost became like an obsession that you were going to take a selfie every chance you got to reinforce that, right?
Absolutely. Because the thing is I wasn't going to be here anymore. And the only thing that was going to be left were these images and these photos.
Yeah.
And that was my hope, was that, by seeing that, she would truly know how much I loved her. And that's all I cared about.
Yeah, it's both good and bad. It's positive. I mean, there's nothing wrong with taking a selfie with your kids. There's nothing wrong with leaving mementos and that kind of thing. It becomes unhealthy when it's fixated on your eventual demise. That was probably a tough habit to break, wasn't it?
It was. It was. And part of that, actually, it was a combination with my therapist. But I ended up, when I finally, I suffered in silence for years, almost 4 years, until I got the strength and courage to finally ask for help and finally address this post-traumatic stress injury. And I went through a program called West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat, and I'm actually a peer volunteer there now. But this program was absolutely amazing. And it was a week-long residential program. It's only for first responders, and it focuses on post-traumatic stress injury. And as part of that, you get assigned kind of like a sponsor, where you have like a 90-day plan, and then you have a year plan, a 2-year plan, a 3-year plan. And part of what we discussed and we came up with is that I needed to start making real memories, like go do things with my daughter instead of just taking pictures, but actually do fun things that she's going to remember. And so that actually led to me going to take her to Disneyland on Father's Day weekend, something I'd never done by myself. And I was very nervous. And I remember we drove all the way down to Southern California. And that was part of my plan. It's like, I committed to it. I'm going to do this. And I want to start making some real memories here versus just taking the photos.
And as far as you knew, let's talk about the Disneyland thing for just a second, because this is a good segue to the next portion here. As far as you knew, there was nothing wrong with you going. You weren't working at the time, but you had the freedom to travel across the state and take her to Disneyland. At least you thought you did.
Yeah. So at this point, I wasn't under any investigation. I took myself off of work because I actually asked for help. So I was out on injury.
Okay.
And it was for a mental injury. So for post-traumatic stress. And I went off initially the very end of December 2016, first week of 2017. And so at that point, I'm seeing a therapist every week. I'm starting to go to weekly first responder peer support meetings that I found out about. And then 5 months into that, in May is actually when I went through the West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat. Mm-hmm. And so I'm fully off work. I'm not on light duty. I'm not reporting in. And it's Father's Day weekend. So I remember we drove down on a Thursday, and we were going to be down there until that Monday morning. And we were going to spend the entire Father's Day weekend down there. And I was so excited about it. I actually posted a picture of her in my back seat because I had her bags packed. I picked her up from her mom, and she has these Mickey Mouse ears with a little veil, and her name's
Right.
stitched on it. And she had the biggest smile I've ever seen. I mean, I have the picture still today. It makes me smile just thinking about it. And I posted that on Facebook.
Sure.
And back then, I was also a PIO, public information officer, and I was friends with everybody pretty much in my department. I mean, from the chief to the captains, lieutenants, sergeants, most of the officers.
Right.
And so I just put it out there.
Very openly doing this. Right. Nothing to hide.
Absolutely.
Right.
But this is what started a chain of events. And this is what really leads into the first real admin betrayal after I asked for help. And so I remember we were driving down there. We end up getting down there late Thursday night, and we hang out at the hotel. We're going to the pool, the hot tub. And the plan is the next morning we're going to go to Disneyland. Well, on the way down there, I get a call, and it looks like it's coming from a city number, from the city of Walnut Creek. And so I just let it go to voicemail. But being the type A OCD person I am, I listened to the voicemail right away. And it's very pleasant. It's somebody from our HR department, and she says, hey, I'm here with Captain so-and-so, and we just wanted to see how the West Coast post-trauma retreat is. We haven't talked to you in a while. We want to see how things are going. And this was the end of the day on Thursday. So they said, hey, it's almost 4 o'clock. So if you get this, give us a call back when you get a chance. And they hung up. And so, I was thinking this isn't a big deal. It can wait. I'm going to focus on my daughter because this is my plan.
Sure.
And so we end up going to sleep, get up the next morning, literally walk across the street to get our Mickey Mouse pancakes. And I sit down and I see another city call coming in. But again, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to focus on my daughter. This is part of my plan. I let it go to voicemail, but I immediately listened to it. Mm-hmm. And now this is where things changed. So this was with the captain that was mentioned in the previous voicemail. And it says, hey, this is Captain so-and-so, it's such and such time on Friday morning. We tried to call you yesterday, but we haven't heard back. And then they say, I don't see any planned vacation for you on the books. And they don't ever mention where I'm at or ask, but it just infers and says, I don't see any vacation on the books. So, please call me back. And if I don't hear from you by the end of today, you need to report to my office on Monday morning at somewhere around 8:30 a.m. and hangs up. And I was panicked. I was like, what is going on here? Like, his voice and demeanor were totally different. He's talking about reporting to his office. Yeah. And I'm panicking because I'm supposed to be down there until literally we're driving back on Monday morning. So I'm not even going to be back until the late afternoon. And so as much as I didn't want to, I looked at my daughter and I said, hey, baby girl, I'm sorry, but we're going to go back to the hotel real quick. I got to call my boss, but I promise we're going to go to Disneyland once I get done with this. So we go back and my stomach is just turning in knots and I'm in this tiny hotel room. My daughter, I'm trying to distract her. And I call the captain back. And again, he doesn't ask where I'm at. He doesn't ask what I'm doing. And I know he knows because everybody knows. And at first he's asking me like, hey, how are things going? How are you doing? And I was very open. I was telling him things I probably shouldn't have. I wasn't required to, but I said, hey, look, things are going great. I told him about, I found a culturally competent therapist. I'm going to these weekly meetings. And I said, West Coast post-trauma retreat was freaking awesome. It's like life-changing. And I said, I'm making progress. I'm getting better. And he's like, well, do you have an expected date or anticipated date when you're going to be back? And I said, well, no, Captain, I don't know, but I can tell you I'm doing everything I can to get better and come back. And he says a little bit later in the conversation, hey, have you thought about retiring? Have you thought about maybe that this job just isn't for you anymore? And I was in shock. I'm like, what am I hearing? Like, literally, this is what I've wanted to do since I was 8 years old. Like, yeah, I'm a fast burner. Like, I'm on the fast track. Like, I've gotten every assignment I wanted. I got promoted quicker than anybody. I want to be chief someday. And you're talking about retirement? Like, are you kidding me? And so we get through the conversation, eventually hang up, and I'm now taking my daughter to Disneyland. But the whole time, that whole weekend, I'm stressed out. I'm just like, literally, I can't stop thinking about this phone conversation. I can't stop thinking about what's going on. And we eventually drive home. 2 days later, I get this official letterhead in the mail, and it says, we understand that you may have been out of the area and you're required to report in, and we don't have any vacation plan for you. So if you went anywhere, you need to submit a leave slip to Lieutenant so-and-so, and had all these policies and regulations mentioned. And I was just like, this is unbelievable. I mean, literally, I drove a few hours on Father's Day weekend during this contentious divorce to take my daughter to Disneyland. And now I've got these people coming out of the woodworks talking about retirement, talking about potential policy violations. And this really set off a chain of administrative betrayal. The thing is up until that point, I was actually getting great support from the city and from my agency. I mean, literally everything was lining up. I was going to where I needed to go. I was getting the resources, but for whatever reason, that phone call conversation changed everything.
I try to tell cops all the time, don't ascribe to malice what can be explained by stupidity or incompetence. In your situation, what do you think was going on here? Why were they turning on you and suddenly treating you suspiciously? What was it? Just bad leadership, or were they out to get you? I mean, what was going on?
I wish I knew the definitive answer on this, and I have a couple theories. The first thing that comes to mind, honestly, and I think this is part of the problem with mental health and the stigma behind it, is that I think that people, and I even felt this way, I felt so guilty when I was off work and trying to get better that I wasn't allowed to have fun, that I wasn't allowed to enjoy life, that I had to suffer.
Yeah.
And if I wasn't suffering and I wasn't feeling horrible, then, I shouldn't be off work. And so I think part of it was this perception of, wait a minute, like, why is Mike, he's off on injury, he can't work, but yet he can take his daughter to Disneyland? Like, right. How is that? And so I think part of that's ignorance. I honestly do. The other part, though, and I don't necessarily think this is an organizational thing, because I worked for a great organization with a lot of great people. I really think this came down, in my case, to one or two people. And this is why when I talk about it, is I mention when I speak to law enforcement agencies across the country, is that, you as one person can make a critical, pivotal difference. I mean, good or bad, in someone's life. And you could be the one that actually either pushes them over the edge, or you could be the one that rescues them and bring them back.
Yeah.
And in my case, I had this one person who was pushing me over the edge. Yeah. And to this day, I don't understand why that is. I mean, I really wish I could sit down and have a conversation with that person and ask them truly, like, what was going on here? But here's the other, here's the other thing I've learned, though, to be honest with you, too, in my recovery and the work that I do, is that, and I was guilty of this myself, but a lot of people that come off as assholes, excuse my language, or people that come off as they don't care, or they're angry all the time, it's because they're dealing with their own trauma. Yes. They're dealing with their own issues.
That's often a red flag for them. Right. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And I honestly think that person was probably dealing with their own demons. They were probably dealing with their own issues.
Yeah.
And they just weren't in a place to be able to acknowledge it. Because for a lot of people, when you acknowledge the fact that you need help, they consider that to be shameful and weakness. And the ironic thing is, it's the polar opposite. It's actually strength and courage to be able to raise your hand and ask for help when you truly need it.
So let me summarize, if I can, and correct me where I get something wrong. But you went through several traumatic things through your career, both in the Air Force and law enforcement. Then you have this fatal shooting, and you go through an investigation, you get sued, the press is treating you terrible, you go through depositions, you go through health scares, a divorce, the loss of your dad, all of these things. You're trying to get healthy, you're getting some good resources finally, you're recovering from this post-traumatic stress injury, and then the department, or at least people in the department, turn on you, and they bring up another investigation on you, which kind of just pushes you out the door. Is that roughly what happened?
It is. And as much as I didn't want to, in August, I made the decision that I was going to medically retire. Yeah. I made that decision because I finally realized that I could not do the job anymore. I just couldn't see the horrific incidents. I couldn't handle stress or stressful situations like I used to. As hard as that was, because this is all I knew, I made the decision that, hey, you know what? I'm going to retire. So I started that process. I started submitting different paperwork. And at that time, which is interesting, they actually changed the law in California that said, if you have any open active investigations, like I investigations, you cannot retire through CalPERS, which is our retirement system.
Right.
And I didn't have any open investigations at this point. But what I later found out was I get a phone call and it's a captain and they're like, hey, at first it's kind of small talk and checking on you, see how things doing. And then it's like, hey, I hate to do this to you, but I have to inform you that you are the subject of an eye investigation. And he goes on further and says, basically, there's this officer. Now, this officer at this point had already been disgraced. It was out in the media. He had lied in like numerous police reports and didn't book evidence and all these things. But they said that he made an accusation that I had told him like a year and a half earlier to 2 years earlier. I asked him to change something in a report, but he didn't change it supposedly. And I approved this report. But the claim was that I told an officer as a supervisor to change something in a report. Mm-hmm. And so then now I'm accused of, they had this list, and it's all in my book, but this list of like 10 different like city policy violations and potential criminal violations. And so
kind of coming out of the blue right here before you retire.
Yeah. I mean, like literally as hard as it was, I made the decision, I'm going to retire. And now this holds up everything. Now this puts everything into jeopardy. Not only is my retirement in jeopardy, but I'm facing potential criminal charges and I could be locked up. And all I could think about, I literally just crashed. I mean, at this point, I thought about ending it all. Like, 'cause all I could envision was, how am I going to be able to sustain my daughter? How am I going to raise her as a single parent when I don't even have a roof over my head? I don't have an income. I don't have retirement. And I'm facing these criminal charges. Yeah. And so literally, I wanted to end my life right then and there. But thank God, I used the tools that I had started to learn, and I called the peer director, the head peer for the West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat. And I talked to him for like 2 hours in my backyard, and he talked me down. I mean, literally, he saved my life. He brought me back into reality and said, look, you're going to get through this. It's going to suck for a while, but here's what you need to do. And I went out and I got another attorney. I had a work comp attorney. Now I have a legal defense fund attorney. And now, I'm fighting these allegations. And they sat on this thing for months and months and months. And I remember we hadn't heard anything. And finally, my attorney sends a letter to the department saying, hey, what's the deal with this investigation? Like, where are we at? This has been months and months. I think within a day, maybe even hours, we got a reply back saying I was cleared of that and I could proceed with my retirement. But
it just went away. Yeah. I mean, what? How frustrating.
Exactly. I mean, it held up my retirement for like 11 months, almost for an entire year. But during that period, I'm sitting there just wondering, waiting for things to drop. I have no clue what's going to happen with my future, if I'm going to be able to even sustain myself.
Yeah.
And so you want to talk about the ultimate betrayal. That's it. I mean, when you think this is your blue family, they have your back. And it's not a family. It's an organization. Right. I realized I was a number just filling a position. And they either wanted me back on the street 100% healthy, or they didn't want me there at all.
Right. Or at least some did. And you're going to have a mix, no matter what organization you're in, where there are individuals who are incompetent and there's individuals who are malicious. And any one of them can step in and really put the screws to you. They can really hurt you. Is there a way to fix that? Is there something that we can change in police culture to make the internal affairs process go better and not be so damaging to innocent officers, or to help with alienated officers who are injured or absent for whatever reason? Is there something we can do in law enforcement culture to make this better?
Well, I think it even comes before that process, that investigative process. I think it starts in the beginning, and it starts with truly caring about your people. And what I mean by that is knowing your people, knowing the people that you supervise, knowing when something's off, when something's not right, but having an established relationship where there's trust already built. And as a leader, you've already shown your own vulnerability to your people so that when they need to, they can trust you to be able to come to you and actually share when things are going on, when things aren't right, and to know that you're going to help them, support them, that you're not going to throw them under the bus.
Yeah.
But if we don't have leaders or supervisors that are open, transparent, and honest and vulnerable, how can we expect our people to be that way or to even admit when they need help? They're not going to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think it all starts with that.
I know that can be a tall order to, okay, we're talking about our supervisors, the people that run these departments. They're in command staff, they're supervising at some level, and they themselves have been through years of traumatic incidences. And we're asking them to be not isolated. We're asking them to be open and transparent. We're asking them to be sensitive to what other people are going through, well enough to lead well when the people they're supervising are being traumatized. I know that's asking for a lot, but I mean, ultimately, that's my goal as a chaplain. I want to see these officers through the entire trajectory of their career be happier and healthier so they don't do damage not only to themselves, but to others.
Absolutely. No, you hit the nail on the head. And if we have healthy officers, both physically and mentally, that's going to equal to better treatment out on the street. It's going to equal to better decision-making, to better use of force. The facts are that if you keep everything bottled up and you have extreme anger and resentment, you feel isolated, bad things can happen.
Yeah, you'll make worse decisions in the field. Yeah.
Exactly. And you may just be having a really bad day and the person pushes the wrong button and you overreact because you have all this stuff that you're not dealing with at home or on your own.
Yeah. Something I appreciated near the end of your book, you mentioned that a chief at an annual training could do something specific. What was that?
Well, I give you an actual real world example of what happened was, and in this case, it was a lieutenant, but again, this applies to any rank, and it could apply to a captain, a chief. And this department here in Northern California, they already had kind of I want to say an established culture where the chief led from the front, was open, was vulnerable. When people needed help, they got the help. And they had this annual kind of peer support training, not just for the peer support people, but for the entire agency. And it wasn't planned, it wasn't announced. But the seasoned veteran lieutenant, he literally decided to just open up and share his personal story in front of the entire department. I mean, all the command staff down to the brand new rookie officers that had just started a week or two earlier who were on FTO. Yeah. And this officer, talked about these traumatic incidents, but more importantly, he talked about the toll on his marriage. He talked about the toll on his physical health, on his mental health, on the toll of his children, on how he treated them. But he also then talked about how he got out of it, how he came out the other side, and what tools he used and programs he used to get better. And the thing is, I think 99% of the department had no clue. I think the only person that knew this was like the chief and maybe a captain. Mm-hmm. But most people had no idea that this lieutenant had gone through that dark period of his life, because we're so good at putting up a front at work and portraying this image that everything is all good. We're all good. Nothing bothers us. Nothing hurts us. And people ask us how we're doing. And we always say we're doing great. We're doing fine. Yeah. And nobody had a clue that this lieutenant, this leader, literally was at the darkest depths of his life. And that's what we need, is we need those real personal stories of recovery and resilience and being open and leaders and
modeling that and indicating, hey, this is okay to talk about, the sudden outpouring of emotion that I had that I couldn't control, or the physical damage it was doing to me because of the stress, or the nightmares, or whatever else. I from this year to that year, I drank too much. Those kinds of admissions. If we can start talking about it, then we don't have officers isolating themselves and suffering alone with those things.
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I want to thank you for your book. I really appreciated it. I thought it was good. Tell me about your co-author.
She is a licensed clinical psychologist. Her name is Dr. Shauna Springer. Mm-hmm. And she's an amazing, amazing woman. But she made this whole project happen, to be honest with you. She's a very gifted writer. She's written a few books already. And she is a culturally competent clinician. She's worked with mostly combat veterans and first responders most of her career. And so she truly gets us. She truly understands us. And this book is very unique in that it's not just a story or just my story, but it's told in a way where every chapter is split into two distinct parts. The first part is my story told in my voice all the way back to childhood till now. And the second part of every chapter, Doc Springer breaks it down and explains things, but in a global sense, so that anybody will understand. I mean, not just first responders, not just our loved ones or military members, but anybody on the street could pick up this book and read it, and they're going to see the true toll of the job. They're going to see the true human side behind the badge. Because we don't let them in. We don't let them see that side. And we need to do a better job on educating the public as to what it is that we truly have to deal with and that we see, and what those effects are on us personally. That, we are people and we do truly care. We're not out there, robots with no feelings just doing this job. Like, it's literally taking a toll on us day in and day out.
Yeah. Awesome book. Fantastic job. And I really thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. This book is saving lives. Definitively, it's saving lives. And I'm getting messages from all over the world, literally every week, from people talking about how it resonated with them. And that's the thing, is that I'm not unique and I'm not special, and nothing that I went through or experienced is. What we talk about in this book is going to resonate with just about everybody out there.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
God bless you. You have a wonderful day today.
You too. Thank you very much.
All righty. Bye-bye. I really appreciated what Michael said in the interview and in his book about the value that a leader can add by being transparent and setting an example of being transparent about the difficulties of a career in law enforcement. If you're in leadership in your agency, you have a delicate balance to strike. On the one hand, you need to be present in the lives of your officers. So stop hiding in the office. You can take 10 minutes to attend a roll call and maybe answer a question or two. On the other hand, if you're in that roll call, there are 1,000 temptations to do the wrong thing, to dominate the space, run the meeting, to tell war stories or chum around with people half your age in a way that's not entirely appropriate. But with a little intentionality and humility, you can strike that balance and be a positive presence in the lives of your young officers. Be the leader that you needed when you were that age. Make sure you check out Michael's book, Relentless Courage. The link will be in the show notes. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
I get tired of the hangovers. I get tired of kind of being in a fog, about 3 or 4 mornings a week. You're just kind of in a fog. And I realized that, at first I thought I could do my better work drunk than I could sober. But I knew that was a phony baloney justification for me. And, I started working undercover. When you work undercover the way I did, especially, it was intelligence and when we work nights, lots of times we just go out and say, okay, just roll around and see what these mob guys are doing. So mob guys go hang out at bars a lot. And so you go hang out at those bars and we're working undercover. As we used to joke, say, well, let's get a 6-pack. That way we're following somebody and they think they see us. We'll just take a drink of our beer and, be a perfect cover. They'll would never think we were cops if we're drinking beer while we're driving around following them and, those kinds of things. And most of the guys I worked with they didn't drink quite as much as I did. They would quit earlier. I would keep going was the difference in me and them.
Please look up Hey Chaplain on both Facebook and Twitter. And if you liked what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. The views expressed here are the personal views of the hosts and our guests and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Hey Chaplain today. And as always, pray for peace in our city.